there's something that we really don't get, that it would be very good for us to get if we wanted to understand what is meant by mental health or mental well-being or whatever other phrase we might want to use for it. And that is the idea of the pleroma, even though it's not an idea, but I don't know what else to call it. It's whatever it is. And nobody, you'll never hear anyone talking about the pleroma. You'll never hear it discussed. You'll never hear it brought into the conversation. And yet it's critical. It's critical to everything. And nobody gets it at all. Or at least, most people don't get it. Some people would get it. But culturally, we don't get it. Culturally, we absolutely don't get it. But one way to talk about the pleroma is, and I'm copying David Bohm in one of his films, one of his videos, and he says to imagine the pleroma. Just imagine that you're outside late at night and you're looking up at the stars and there's no clouds, there's just loads of stars. So our regular way of seeing things is to see that there's nothing in the night sky. There's nothing there apart from the stars. So there's a huge amount of blankness punctuated by stars, and the stars are things, and what's in between the stars is just nothing. So then what the pleroma is when we look at the night sky and we look up and we see that in a reversed way. So we see that everything is light apart from the pinpoints, and there's pinpoints of darkness. So that's a photographic reverse of the night sky. Everything's light apart from the stars, which are pinpoints of darkness. So then that shows us what the pleroma is. It's when there's a photographic inversion of everything. And because of whatever convention that we are adhering to, a convention of understanding or perceiving, we see it backwards. So we could say that our condition as human beings is that we see everything backwards in this way. And we're so very used to it, of course, that it certainly doesn't seem that we're seeing things backwards. It seems like we're seeing things the only way that we possibly could see things. And the very idea that there might be another way of seeing it is not feasible for us at all. But having said that, whenever we penetrate deeply enough into any type of field, we will start to understand that there is this reversal there, that there is this whole new way of looking at things, which is a back to front or photographically inverted way. So we could learn to see things in this different way via the practice of meditation, perhaps, just to give one example. So normally, when we listen to people, the way we see it is that when words come out of them, when they say things, the word is the thing. And that's the important thing. That's where the juice is. That's where the money is, potentially. But in between the words, there's nothing of value. It's just the gap between the words. We have to have gaps because we have to breathe or swallow or clear our throats or think a little bit about what we're saying. So really the gap is just, it's a kind of inefficiency in our communicating. If we could speak very, very fast with no gaps, we'd be able to communicate a whole load of information. And that's exactly what we do when we're excited and we want to say lots of things. We just talk and talk and talk and hardly leave any gaps. And when we're listening to people who are talking relatively slowly, but we're interested, it's said that we are hanging on their every word. So a word comes out of them and it's like, whoa, wow, can't wait to see what the next word is. We're hanging in there, waiting for the next exciting word. So whenever we're listening to people that have something interesting or important to say, we're like that. We're waiting for each word. So the way that this gets reversed is if we do a lot of meditation, we start to get reorientated. So we realize that there's more in silence than there is in sound. It's richer, it's more interesting, it's deeper. The sound becomes not the thing. Silence becomes a thing. So then you can listen to people in a completely different way. You can listen to people and realize that the good stuff is in between the words. So don't focus on the words. Don't get all het up waiting for the next word, because the word is nothing. It really isn't. There's no information in it. The information in this reverse paradigm is in the gap. So that gives us a totally different way of listening to people. We're listening to their gaps. We're listening to their silence, not listening to what they have to say. That's actually a much more satisfying way of listening to people. Because on the whole, unless we need a particular bit of information, as in how do I find such and such a thing, or where do I go to such and such a place, most of the words we come out with are redundant and repetitive and exhausting, and they're kind of boring. So when you listen to people talk, for the most part, it's an ordeal, because you're listening to all this talk, and it's just that people talk, and you can get fed up with it. You may be waiting for a chance to say your words after they've stopped for a break, and then you say your words. But it's all kind of like it's all like a battering ram. It's all like an offence. It's all like an aggressive thing, and it's exhausting, that type of thing. But if we were to tune into the silence, we'd realise that's really, really interesting, and it's also much more evocative of what's really going on. The words are a distraction. If you pay attention to the narrative, to the word, you miss the point, because the point isn't that. We could also apply this to music even, which is hard. It's hard to imagine that you could apply it to music, because in music we think, well, the sounds are good, they're melodious, they're pleasing to the ear, quite possibly, and so we think the sounds are the thing. But yet again, even though the sounds are melodious and can be pleasing to the ear, if you listen to, say, an orchestra playing or something like that, you start to get this weird feel. Possibly you could get this weird feeling that actually when the music stops, or the intervals, that is part of it as well, and somehow listening to the music increases our perception of the silence. So we get to appreciate silence more by listening to the music, and the music itself will be nothing without the gaps and silences in it. So there again, we're getting to this point where we're looking at things in a different way. And the crucial example that we could give is thinking, which is talking in the head. And the same thing is true for this. For the most part, we think our thoughts are it. That's where the interesting stuff is. So we're there listening to the thoughts. Here's a thought, and there's a thought, and we're hanging on to every thought, because we haven't realized there's actually nothing in thoughts. Thoughts don't really tell us anything at all. We might think they do, but that's only because we haven't been introduced to the subtler world. So the subtler world is the world that can be glimpsed between the gap between one thought and the other thought, so the next thought, the subsequent thought. And once we do get tuned into that, so that we do get this ability to appreciate the subtle aspect of the universe, we realize that gap is the most fascinating thing there is. It's fascinating because it's endlessly deep. Like a word is superficial. The meaning of a word is very, very superficial. It's like a plastic toy. It is what it is, and then once you know what it is, you can discard it because it's no longer any interest. It's a one-level meaning. have to rush on to the next thought to keep yourself occupied, and then the next and the next and the next, and that's a terrible superficial game. But once we look into the gap between the thoughts, we realize that there is no final level of meaning in it, and the more you look, the more there is to see, like in the line from the Beatles song. This isn't apparent to us straight away because we haven't got what it takes to penetrate the depths of the silence. We just straight away we see, well, there's not a thought there, therefore it's nothing. Or it's not a word there, therefore it's nothing. So it takes patience and cultivation to cultivate that sense. But then we realize that silence is more than sound. Sound is a mere agitation, a little wave running across the sea. But the silence is the mighty depths of the ocean itself. Now, once we do readjust our perceptions to see things this way, it changes everything about us. It changes our impatience, and it changes our goal-orientatedness, our graspingness, our clutching after one thing after another. Because the reason we're clutching after one thing after another, it could be a word, it could be a thought, or it could be an event. The good thing's going to happen. So we're waiting for the good thing to happen, not realizing that that isn't a good thing at all. That the good thing is when nothing's happening, the peace in between the events. And of course, this is kind of what happens as we get older anyway. In the general run of things, if we kind of do mature in this way, we learn to appreciate peace rather than excitement, because there's more in peace than there is in excitement, because excitement is shallow. The type of excitement that I'm talking about is events happening. Christmas. Hey, it's Christmas. Hey, it's this. Or hey, my team has just scored a goal. Whatever, all these events. And all of these events, they only have a very, very shallow level of meaning, because as soon as you've reached that meaning, there's nowhere else to go. Like I was saying. So because of that, we are always clutching after the next one, because when we've got it, it doesn't satisfy, because it's trivial. So this puts us in this position where our life becomes grasping after the things, getting fed up with them pretty quickly and then grasping for the next thing, and keeping ourselves going because we think there's going to be an ultimately good thing coming along, which will be so good we may not have to grasp for things anymore. We'll have got the thing, we'll have got it. And that equates to James Carter's idea of an all-time winner, winning all the little contests, and that's great. And we think if we get good enough at winning, we'll win so magnificently we won't have to try to win anymore, because we'll be an all-time winner. It's like having a thought that's so great that when we're thinking it, we don't have to think anything else. It says everything. Having a theory that explains everything. Now that doesn't actually happen. That's just the myth. That's what keeps us hooked into it. What actually happens is we keep on clutching after one thing after another, playing one finite game after another, until in the end we die. We'll get too tired to do it anymore. Nothing ever comes of it. It's an ongoing irritation. And this ongoing irritation that's what our everyday life is. It isn't really life at all. It's an ongoing irritation. It's this continual grasping after superficial excitement, whether it's a word or a thought or whatever the hell it is. So really, it's a state of impoverishment. As Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, it's a state of impoverishment. And when we're in this state of impoverishment, and when we are the impoverishment, as Jesus says in the verse, we're always grasping, because whatever the hell is out there, it's not in us. It's got to be out there. So Got to really get seriously into the grasping. Now, actually, what we're grasping at isn't anything. It's basically we're grasping at our own projections. So we're in a state of great poverty, and out of this poverty spring projections, little intimations of, oh, look, there might be something, so we go for it, but it isn't. And then the next little thing that pops up is another intimation. Oh, look, there might be something here. And we know on a very deep level that there's nothing where we are, so we have to look outside of ourselves. But all we see outside of ourselves is our own projections of what we think it would be like to actually have something, for there to be actually something good there. So it's like we go through the week and we're bored, but we think, hooray, it's Saturday, I can do all the exciting things. So everything's being pinned on form, on structure, on actual events. And events are always shallow, form is always shallow. It's always, anything that isn't shallow and trivial is formlessness or space, because it doesn't have a bottom, because it doesn't have a final level of meaning that we reach very quickly. So the normal frame of mind is this kind of irritated frame of mind, this irritated state of being where we're grasping after some kind of relief the whole time, and the relief is only temporary because it's not real. It's a phony relief. It's a relief because we think it's going to be a relief, so we get all het up about it, thinking, this is the one, boys, this is the one. And then it isn't, but that's okay, because maybe the next one will be. So that's kind of like a gambling mentality, of course. And that's our life. That is what it's at. That is our pastime. That's what we do. So the big change that comes about when we get what is meant by the pleroma and the photographic inverse of all of this is that we're no longer waiting for the next good thing to happen. We're no longer grasping after the next thing, which doesn't exist because there are no things anyway. We just imagine there's going to be this thing called a thing that's going to happen. That thing is born out of our utter and complete impoverishment. It's a counterpoint to it. So that the way that this does change us is that on the first hand, we're no longer grasping after superficial sensation the whole time. It's like watching bad TV. We're no longer addicted to watching bad TV the whole time. So that's good. It's more dignified. There's nothing more undignified than straining after superficial sensations that aren't worth a damn anyway, even when they do come. It's more the excitement of the chase more than anything else. It's thinking we're going to get something good. So that's the first change. And the second change is our being is transformed, because we're no longer relating to our own projections. We're no longer relating to the superficial world of our thoughts, which kind of pretend to be the world, but they aren't, because they're just our thoughts. We're relating to something real and deep. So there's a quality of our relatedness to whatever's around us. It becomes more real. It becomes more profound. It's not cheap and tawdry, and it's no longer trashy. We've actually found some kind of deeper well of meaning. And in actual fact, there is no meaning at all in our normal type of existence, because there is no meaning in form. Form is merely there as a distraction. So we become dignified, we become more real, our lives become more meaningful. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about mental health, really. We're talking about our lives actually being meaningful. But in order for that to happen, we absolutely have to realize that the good stuff isn't what's being flashed up on the news, on the newscast the whole time. The good stuff isn't the news. It's not like everything's made up of bad news and good news, and we're kept hooked there listening for every single news item. The real good stuff isn't news. It's not part of the narrative. And it's something we can relate to when we stop being continuously distracted and driven feverish in this kind of an irritated kind of a way by our addiction to our own thoughts, by our addiction to what is essentially rubbish, cheap rubbish. So instead of thinking the answer is going to be in the cheap rubbish, in the trash, in the garbage, we actually realise that there's something else there and there's no need to strive after it because it's there already, and it's not a gimmick, it's not a trick. So at that point of view, we've changed from being in a mode of being which is entirely based on grasping, as they say in Buddhism, which is doing. So it's doing, basically. We're in doing mode. And instead we've switched into being mode, which is very, very different indeed.